Okay, everyone, thanks for joining me for the live studies once more. Week after week, we conduct these hour-and-a-half long studies, 2 separate topics in 1.5 hours. First topic, which is an hour long, is Eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events. We're working our way towards the book of Revelation, but we're going slowly as we look at different topics that build up to the climax, which is the book of Revelation. I call that the climax in my study because it's the final say. It's the last book that was canonized, recognized by the body of Messiah, that God gave to the church to equip us and to prepare us for the end time scenario. Right now we're in topic 10, Rapture Views and Overview. Last week I tried to finish this topic, and then I realized that I was just going too fast and it wasn't going to be a worthwhile a beneficial study if I just raced through it. So I slowed down a little bit, but it's entirely plausible that we will finish topic 10 tonight, Rapture Views and Overview, and we'll be ready next week to turn into topic 11, making a case for the pre-wrath view, which is the view that I hold to. The second 30-minute segment of the hour-and-a-half long study is entitled A Trinitarian Response to Biblical Unitarianism. It is an apologetic section where we're working through Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, talking about those titles that were given to the child: Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Are these messianic titles referring to a human Messiah, a human king, or are they an additional inside look at the fact that this Messiah would be divine, whatever that means, right, in many discussions? And so we're challenging the non-Trinitarian position, otherwise referred to as Biblical Unitarian in my studies, and we Trinitarians are challenging their perspective. And so if you're interested in topics like that, stick around for both of them. All right, let's jump right into the first one. Eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events. Looking at my screen, we've got topic 10, Rapture Views and Overview. Moving past that, next week, I believe, we'll start into... I'm not even going to be so sure. I'm just going to say if I feel that I need to slow down and keep going into topic 10, that's what I'll do. Topic 11, making a case for the pre-wrath view, and then topic 12, Rapture Views, a final analysis, where we're going to take the 4 views that I'm working from and examine them kind of one more time briefly, looking this time at strengths and weaknesses, so that you, the Bible student that's watching these YouTube videos or following along with my podcast, whichever way you're getting these resources, you, the Bible student, can make your own informed decision. All the while realizing, and I'll say this real quick and then I'll just jump right into the study. I hope you realize that eschatology is an extremely important topic in terms of biblical topics. However, when we compare it in light of the fact that Jesus is Lord and that we must have a relationship with him if we are going to survive in these last evil days, then we realize that our differing eschatological perspectives pale in comparison to the central foundational truths that are taught in the Bible when it comes to, do you believe that Jesus is the Messiah? And so we need to major on the majors and minor on the minors, as important, I think, as eschatology is, because we do need to be equipped. We need to be ready. We need to be able to have a witness. We need to be able to, I believe, be even convincing to some degree that we need to be ready for Jesus' return. We need to, as believers who hold to any sort of end-time scenario, be able to connect together as like-minded individuals, because we realize that when the time comes for Antichrist to come on the scene, which most end-time students hold to some form of persecution that's coming down the road. Remember, when Antichrist hits the scene, as far as I can ascertain, he's not going to spare those who are of one end-time scenario and persecute those who are of a different one. In other words, to him, we all look the same. We're all either Jews or Christians, and his intense wrath and hatred will be aimed at us. And he doesn't really care whether we're going to raise the flag and say, "Don't persecute me. I'm a pre-tribber." Now, of course, the pre-tribbers get around with that because they don't believe they're going to face the Antichrist. But what if you're wrong? So consider that your eschatological view, your end-time view, is important. And like I said, I'm not trying to minimize studying it. I think we should have these types of studies. I'm conducting one. Hello. However, are you focusing on the majors? Is your heart given to Yeshua? Have you surrendered your life to God through the person of his son, Messiah Yeshua? Are you making that relationship with him the primary focus of the reason why you have Bible study in the first place? Are you seeking to be a witness to other people who don't yet know Jesus? So just keep in mind, we can have these discussions and differences, but at the end of the day, not only is the Antichrist not going to care which view we hold to, but I believe Yeshua himself is coming back for a church that, as long as we have that relationship, we will meet him. We will be gathered together to him. And the people that are gathered together are going to be a great multitude. No man can number, right, according to Revelation chapter 7. And this innumerable multitude is surely going to be composed of various segments of pre-tribbers, pre-wrathers, post-tribbers, mid-tribbers, amillennialists. We're going to have an eclectic mix in there. It's because our eschatological view isn't what guaranteed that we would meet our Lord. It was our faith in him that does. So let's get our priorities straight and not quibble too much. I'm watching the comments in my YouTube videos, and I see people going to blows, especially the pre-tribbers versus the post-tribbers. It's kind of a long-standing, debate and feud that's been going on for a while, but you guys need to just chill. Okay. All right, let's jump into the study. What we're looking at are rapture views and overview, and I wrote up this little paper sometime back when we introduced this particular topic, number 10. And since I feel we're drawing this part of the topic, number 10, to a close, I read these explanations last week with the idea that I was going to finish this, and I didn't finish it. But we need then this to look at the overview, the rapture views one more time. So I'm working from 4 common views. There are, I think, truly 6 if I were to expand this, but the 4 most well-known and the ones that are more easily understandable from a face value reading of Scripture are the pre-trib view, which takes the last 7 years of human history that's relevant for humans before the millennial kingdom comes in. So all 4 of these views anticipate a very real millennium that's going to be established on planet Earth. What's life going to be like in the last 7 years prior to the millennium? That's what we're talking about. All of these are pre-millennial. It's just we have a kind of a division between what's called historic premillennialism and dispensational premillennialism. But the common term is premillennial. Christ is coming back prior to the millennium to establish his kingdom in the millennium. So pre-trib says this rapture, this second coming of Christ, there are 2 separate events, and they're separated by a full 7 years. God's wrath and tribulation are the separating factor between those 2 events, and that 7 years is marked by tribulation and great tribulation, and that's the way it looks. Christians are exempted from the wrath of God. Christians are exempted from the tribulation in this particular model. When we move down into the mid-trib view, I mistakenly have described this as really the same theology as the pre-tribbers in previous teachings, but I want to walk back those comments and apologize for not properly representing the mid-tribulation view. No, their theology is quite different from the pre-tribbers. For number one, pre-trib view, as I understand it, is dispensational. Their view of Israel and the church are separate entities, and that's one of the big factors that causes pre-tribbers to place the rapture where they do, outside of tribulation, because in their view, the last 7 years is the 70th week of Daniel, and that 70th week of Daniel belongs not to the church, but to Israel. So by virtue of belonging to the church, or by virtue of belonging to Israel, the separation between the church and Israel is maintained. Well, mid-tribbers, as I keep researching more and more just to make sure I'm reading this correctly, I believe they're not as much focused on the dispensational aspect. I think they would fall in line with, if I remember correctly, rereading this week again, they have some affinity for the historic premillennial perspective, which is non-dispensational, which is just a fancy way to say that they can allow for God's program to be a little bit more combined when it comes to Israel and the church. God can work with both groups at the same time. But we do have a rapture that happens prior to God's wrath being poured out mainly. Meaning, if you look at the chart in front of you, Christians go through tribulation. So they don't have a problem saying that we are going to be in the tribulation as Christians, even if it's the 70th week of Daniel that is in view. So they don't have a problem saying, yeah, it might be a 7-year slice given over to Israel, but we Christians are involved in the affairs that God is dealing with Israel, at least up to this point. Halfway through, when the Antichrist takes his seat in the temple and declares himself to be God, per Daniel 9:27, per 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 1 through around 10, something like that, then we've got an event that takes place in the middle of the week that is significant enough for mid-tribbers to identify it as rapture. And then, so thus, from their perspective, Christians go through tribulation, but we are excused or exempted or rescued from the wrath of God. Second coming is at the far end, but there's still separation between the two. Moving down the list into the charts that we've been working from, post-trib is the third view we've been examining. This view has existed for a long time as not just an answer to pre-trib, meaning this view is historical premillennial, meaning it is not dispensational premillennial. This view allows for the program that God is dealing with the church and the program that God is dealing with Israel to overlap one another in this 7-year slice. In other words, both groups, both the church and Israel, face not only the tribulation time period, but they also potentially face the wrath of God. Now, this is just one view of this. This is just one graphic that you're seeing. There's another version of this. Let me just scroll down and show it to you, because there's actually a few different. In this particular model, the post-trib, if you notice the wrath of God arrow at the far bottom, is not running the full 7-year duration. It only accounts for maybe the last half. And yet in another view, this one, the post-trib in the lower left corner, the day of the Lord, also known as the wrath of God, is a mere 24 hours long. So what you can see then is that if we go back to this chart, what we can see is that post-trib hasn't yet kind of consolidated their perspectives into one maybe representational view, and perhaps that's why it's still a bit what should we say, undecided when it comes to how long exactly is the wrath of God, aka the day of the Lord. What's the duration? When we get to pre-wrath, I'll tell you my perspective on how long I think the wrath of God is. But post-trib is kind of undecided in that perspective. But there are a lot of good post-trib teachers who don't believe that we need to even focus on the duration of the wrath of God. We just need to know that God is going to protect us throughout the outpouring of his wrath. That's the main focus, is that we are going to, as Christians, experience all of the bad stuff, but God is not going to destroy us in the process. A defining feature of the post-trib view is twofold. One, we face all of the bad stuff, and God has to shelter us in place. He has to protect us supernaturally somehow so that we don't perceive it as judgment. Because remember, wrath of God is intended for unrepentant sinners. That is a primary feature of the day of the Lord that's described in the Old Testament. We cannot rip that theme away from the day of the Lord when we're studying topics such as the wrath of God, the day of the Lord. It is punishment and retribution for a world that has rejected God, his Messiah, and his Holy Spirit, for a world that has rejected his word as truth, a world that is in rebellion and has chosen their allegiance. And like I mentioned in some of my prayers sometimes, we're going to have two choices in one day. There will be two primary polar opposite figures vying for our attention one day. On the one hand, we're going to have Satan, and on the other hand, we're going to have Jesus Christ himself. Satan is the man of sin. Jesus is the sinless man, right? You like those titles, those descriptions? Satan is described using his name Lucifer as a light bearer. Right, his name means kind of shining one or light bearer. The phrase Lucifer itself. So he's described as the light bearer, or the one whose name means light. Jesus Christ is the true light that has come into the world. He is the light that is shined upon all men. So he is the true light. Satan is a counterfeit light. He disguises himself as an angel of light, and he's done so to many people, and they have believed that light only to find out that it's a lie. So who are you going to follow? Are you going to follow Satan one day, or are you going to follow Jesus Christ? The Antichrist represents Satan's perspective. And so that's why we need to have these careful discussions so we can understand that the primary thing that's going to save us in that day is who we make our choice to follow. And guess what? When that day comes, it's going to be more difficult to make that choice. What am I saying? You need to make your choice today. Don't wait. Don't put this decision off until the last minute. Don't be so sure that you're going to be able to just flip a switch and say, I'm going to choose Jesus, but for now I'm going to have my fun. Doesn't work that way. Salvation is not in your hands. Salvation belongs to our God. So you need to you need to get with the understanding that the Bible admonishes us that today is the day of salvation. Don't wait. If the Holy Spirit is prompting you and tugging at your heart to make a confession for Jesus, to surrender your life to him, to get on God's side of the program, you need to do it now while that message and while that opportunity is there, while that door is open, because God is in control of salvation. He's the one that draws us. Yeshua is the one that makes those decisions. Yes, we have free will. Yes, we freely choose. Yet at the same time, there has been and can be again the place where God closes the door and doesn't allow people to make free will choices the way they think. There's even coming a day, according to the book of Revelation, when man won't even be able to kill himself. Even death will be out of mankind's hands. I mean, as strange as that sounds, you're thinking, well, I can't take this. I'll just jump off of a bridge, jump out of a building, take poison or something. God's going to say, nope, not going to let you kill yourself. You're going to have to go through the suffering. That sounds very, very cruel and difficult, but things are going to come to that. So back to these views. Post-trib has a lot of good traction when it comes to locating many of the truths of end-time events within a sequential way of understanding the Bible. One thing that's also characteristic of their perspective is that their rapture view and their second coming are the same event, so that it creates one single event that is described in passages such as Matthew chapter 24, Mark chapter 13, Luke chapter 17, Luke chapter 21, 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, 1 Corinthians chapter 15. I'm just naming some of the ones that are popping into my head. Well, rapture is surely a monumentous event, and I've heard so many discussions on throwing rapture under the bus. Oh, there's no rapture. Rapture is a hoax. There's no secret rapture. What we have to remember is that the popular view of rapture, known as pre-trib, is the one that takes the most beating, because it's the one that, of the four that I'm looking at, it's the one that seems to be the most indefensible based on some of the details that are in front of us. Post-trib has a lot of attractive points that are brought into the discussion that I myself personally, if I wasn't a pre-wrather, I'd be a post-tribber. But I am not a post-tribber. I'm a pre-wrather for now, based on the details that I have studied, using that last book also that I didn't mention in my list when I rattled off all those passages. Now I can bring the book of Revelation into the picture, because it contains the final word that Jesus himself gave to John while he was exiled on the Isle of Patmos in the 90s, I believe, not the 70s. And in so doing, Jesus gave the final details that was necessary for a church to ready herself when the time came for the events to be enacted. And so pre-wrath draws heavily on not just all the other passages in front of it, but it does one of the best jobs of taking the book of Revelation in its most natural sense when it comes to the sequencing. And that's why it's able to take what is recognized as historical premillennialism and sharpen it into more focus, meaning the pre-wrath view is only new in name only. And it's only, I know it's only like 30 years old, 30 or 40, all right? Marvin Rosenthal, Robert Van Kampen are the fathers of the pre-wrath view. And so, yeah, it came into existence by name in the 80s, I believe. So it's that 30 or 40 years old. But the theology of pre-wrath is rooted in the what we call historical premillennialism, which goes all the way back to the church fathers. So, what does the pre-wrath teach in a nutshell? Same 7-year slice like all the others. This time, however, we've got different points of separation. The earlier part of the 70th week, the first half, is described as the beginning of sorrows. We've got the midpoint on the chart, just like we did all the others. And then we've got a section known as the Great Tribulation. And then we've got a section known as the Day of the Lord, or God's wrath. The rapture separates the Great Tribulation from the Day of the Lord. So the rapture happens in front of the Day of the Lord, or the initiating part of God's wrath. And then the second coming is at the back end of the Day of the Lord. And they are separated by a time frame. However, what's important to notice is that pre-wrath recognizes the rapture and the second coming as a single event known as the parousia, the arrival of Christ or the presence of Christ. The gathering together at the rapture is not disconnected from the second coming by 7 years. There is a separation between the two because there are details that the pre-wrath believes sequentially are separate, as well as some of the reasons why Jesus has to come. It looks like he comes twice, but germane to the pre-wrath view, or very important to it, foundational to its understanding, is that the Great Tribulation and the Day of the Lord are not the same thing. They're two separate things, contrary to many of the other views that are in comparison to the pre-wrath, such as pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib. The Great Tribulation, which is the wrath of Satan, is distinct from the Day of the Lord, which is the wrath of God. We have two separate powers demonstrating their own wrath, and those are those two powers that I was describing earlier, the power of Satan and the power of Jesus himself. So the Day of the Lord is a unique event that is reserved for unrepentant sinners, and it's reserved for the punishment of the evil beast empire that Satan will raise up in that last day, the new world order that will be raging on the scene.